The civil rights issue of our time, have you ever been maliciously treated, in even emotional or psychological ways? Well, the civil rights issue of our time is around my work with the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. And, I want to talk about why that is, emotional abuse, understanding emotional abuse, and this tort, which I've worked to elevate, the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress, can be the civil rights element of our time. Because a lot of the mistreatment in our world, when you think about it, all abuse and hatred and rage is a psychological thing. If people have been hurt or off kilter or whatever it is, who act against others. And we're in a time now where, it's more obvious when people do physical acts of violence, sexual abuse, thankfully, has come out of the closet. We know more about that. But the real challenge, and I call it sometimes like oxygen. I liken my work sometimes to Michael Sandiovogus, who discovered oxygen, because emotional abuse, psychological abuse is invisible, right? The real challenge of our time is to understand the rubric of emotional, psychological abuse. And indeed, over the last 20 years, I've studied the whole thing experienced it for 30 years or more. And for 20 years, I've developed a legal remedy in terms of the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I'm still working on it. Many efforts, many knockdowns, get back up. And, among the range of work I do, all kinds of areas, the gentle genius coaching, fairness, I believe at the core, if I could elevate this tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress into the legal caveat, into the landscape of America, I'll have done something outstanding. And it's so important because this tort, it's called, again, the tort for the intentional, right? Intention is so key. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Because, courts, it's been around a long time, this law, and courts don't really know what it is. And I've, my cold, the diamond passage and crucible and history that I've experienced, 30 years intensively of emotional distress, people, in a familial, group situation really trying to pin me down, define me falsely, contrary to what I am. And that's, the key of emotional distress. We talk about extreme narcissism, psychopathy. It's people who are not healthy, who work to pin down others because of their rage, their jealousies. They don't want others to become their true selves. That's why with Gentle Genius Coaching, I'm always helping people become the true you, because I really understand the psychology of our times and how dangerous it can be and how harmful emotional distress, the general psychology and emotional abuse itself is. And so, as I've experienced this in a cold to diamond process, under this crucible, I've worked to elevate, the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress. So I was saying, it's an older law. The courts don't know. And even as I've advanced it over the last 20 years, people really don't know how to handle it. But then they're not clear yet that emotionally related actions, psychologically related actions can cause such harm to a person, keeping people in certain situations, shunning them, withholding affection, social standing, financial rewards, whatever they be. But there's a whole realm of activities and plausibly, deniability, the emotional abuse. So, well, I'm not doing anything. And it's right on a couple of levels. One, they're not doing what they need to be doing in terms of reciprocity, interdependence, care for another. And because of the invisible nature, they're appearing like they're not acting to harm another person. Well, we're just shunning them, or I just don't like them. And of course, people can have their likes and dislikes. It's when, though, it becomes a pattern, and it's intentionally, over time, will really cause harm to another person, their psyche and their soul. And often it's like a group doing it to one person, the black sheep and all this kind of thing. So my work over the last 20 years, 30 years and then 20 years with the tort, is really trying to elevate this tort and get it understood. And I could see where it's the civil rights issue of our times. And why I say that, because emotional abuse is an evener. It's about fairness for all. It's saying every human being deserves to be treated respectfully and fairly. It's interjecting appropriateness and saying don't always need strict rules. We need guidelines of fairness and care and appropriateness for human beings. And so, with all the rage and put downs and, meanness online and other systems that aren't really responding that well, being legally, politically, I say with love for America, I want it to do better. But, this law can be a guideline, a tort thrust right in the middle of America, say, because one of these things is when people act out, they say beyond all bounds of decency. It can be the establishment of decency in America again, and not as much again. We've had some at some points, but we need it across the boards for all people, and that's the beauty of the tort. It doesn't distinguish between people of any race, ethnicity, sexual identity, anything of the like. It's all about religion. It's all about the human being, okay? And I'm at a point now, I'm still working on it, and God willing, I'll advance this tort to a higher level, and it will reestablish civil rights in a different way, in a new way, with blessings to the giants who came before, the Martin Luther Kings, Andrew Young, Jesse Jackson, all the people who worked to establish equality in some ways in our culture, in different ways in our culture. This can add a layer for all human beings and take this toxicity of emotional attacks that we have going on. And so that's my work in part. And so there's a little narrow avenue that's opened up where I can, work on this. And, the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress can be the civil rights. It is a civil rights issue of our times. It can establish fairness and equality at a time that America desperately needs fairness and equality. You can call it equity, but it just needs respect for all people. Thank you.